This is Rob Tabbert for Boxing Social in association with Betfred. Delighted as always to be joined by the WBC president, Mr. Mauricio Sulaiman. You've had a shave, you're looking very sharp. Mauricio, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Rob. Thank you very much. I did shave and did my trim. So getting ready for the new normality in this current way of living.
The new normality indeed. We're kind of on the cusp now of boxing officially returning, well, certainly over in the UK. Obviously, it's been back in other territories so far. With that being said, been a busy week or so with the WBC. Why don't you tell us all what you've been up to?
We had a very big week. We had several matters that went to the Board of Governors for voting. We have a final elimination in the cruiserweight division that will take place in Russia. A fight between Fortuna and Linares for California. And also Luke Campbell to fight Ryan Garcia for the interim title, which is good activity. We published our ratings for the month of July and did a Board of Governors meeting, fights in Las Vegas, in Mexico, a couple of states of Mexico. So good activity, very much fun.
Have you enjoyed getting back to it?
Very much. We have been doing the remote judging system. It's a program that has been incredibly gratifying for me personally. We have used judges remotely in order to minimize the number of persons that are in the place where the fight is taking place without public. Rather, that reduces the amount of people in the studio. And for example, yesterday we had 7 judges judging remotely the fights in Mexico City, and the results are incredible. I mean, it's now evident the more judges you have, the more quality and the less risk of a bad decision.
Just explain that. Go into that further and explain the changes that you've made.
Well, this program we created 2 years ago for evaluation of ring officials and for training. They would judge from home the fights that are going on television. And that way you keep track on how that judge is doing. And also it serves as a review in case of a controversy. It's not the same to make a review live rather than when you already know the result of the fight. So that has been working very well. Now with this problem of the COVID-19, having to do boxing cards without public, we started doing a protocol. And that came about because for the authorities, it is very important to have the fewest amount of persons in that studio, in that ringside, because you have to test them, because you have to have the protocol for every single person who is involved in the fight. So taking out one element, which is judges, you take out about 10% or 15% of the number of persons for that event. So we tried it and it has been very successful. The technology is working flawlessly. The report comes immediately. And having 6 or 8 judges, you could see the tendency for a round that is even close. When you have a split criteria, all of them, I mean, all the fights were scored without any controversy. Every round had a clear winner. If you had 7, 2 go one way, 5 go the other way, it means very much that fighter won that round. So we're enjoying it. We're playing with that idea. We don't know where it's going to lead to. We're not trying to threat any situation, but just having fun and seeing if there are any results that can be good for the sport from here.
Okay, that's interesting. I look forward to seeing further evidence of that as we progress through this post-COVID-19 stage. Just going back on comments that you just made at the beginning of the interview, we've obviously had the the WBC announcements regarding the lightweight title situation at the minute. Let's start off with the Diamond title. Javier Fortuna and Jorge Linares. Javier Fortuna, the last time I spoke to you, was scheduled to fight Luke Campbell. Explain the decision and how we ended up fighting Jorge Linares for the Diamond title.
Well, basically, Fortuna and Linares have been in California since January. There is no travel restrictions. They're together. They're in the same state, and they were able to reach an agreement to do a fight in August with a set date in a safe place. So the anxiety of getting into the ring is the uncertainty is very big for many fighters. So I'm not going to go into details about Fortuna Campbell. The reality is that fight was not made. So Fortuna is fighting Linares, who is highly ranked in the WBC. Both are multi-division champions. So that fight is going to be a final elimination bout. And they requested the WBC to present an award in form of the Diamond Belt for that fight, to gratify that fight. And the WBC accepted it. Luke Campbell, who was scheduled to fight for the title, for the interim, first the title, then the interim title against Fortuna, requested the WBC to continue the process for the interim title. Since Fortuna pulled out, it's not Luke Campbell's fault. So the WBC has ordered him and Ryan Garcia to fight for the interim title. So in a way, it's a big tournament in the lightweight division with very attractive fights with the top-ranked fighters of the division, and it could get very interesting. We can see a set of good fights to take place during this and next year.
Just going back to Javier Fortuna versus Jorge Linares, as you mentioned, Javier Fortuna was slated to initially face Luke Campbell for the interim title, which would have made the winner of that fight next in line to box Devin Haney. Fortuna is now boxing for the Diamond title. If he wins that, or Linares wins that, where does that leave them? Do they still have the same privileges as would have had if he'd won the interim belt?
Yeah, it's a direct final elimination, which is between of the top fighters. Devin Haney won a vacant title, so he has to do 2 mandatory title defenses. When he was injured, he was placed in champion in recess. Now he's back as a champion of the world. He was, with this activity happening, he's awarded a voluntary defense, and then he has to comply with the mandatory defenses according to the rules and regulations. So it's just shaping activity into something that can create good fights for the division. And we're going to see on the timing on Luke Campbell when he's ready, when that fight can be made. Hopefully there will be no restrictions on travel or the countries having any situation, but we're going to evaluate. We should be having news this coming week about that fight.
Before we come on to Luke Campbell and Ryan Garcia, you just mentioned there that Devin Haney was initially slated to have 2 mandatory defenses because he won an interim title and then was elevated. What's changed? Why is he now afforded a voluntary?
Because there's no mandatory right now. They are in the process of making that spot. Before it was going to be the winner of Fortuna against Campbell. So everything was in time in the process. Right now, there is no mandatory contender. It was announced eventually a few weeks ago that Campbell was going to Haney. So everything is it's complicated with the current situation without having the certainty of scheduling. But now we have a fight that will provide at least 1 mandatory contender, and then we're hoping to have the other fight to have the second mandatory contender.
And assuming, as I say, we're going to come on to Luke Campbell versus Ryan Garcia. I'm assuming in this instance, then, if this plays out this way, that the winner of Fortuna Linares will then box the winner of Campbell versus Garcia, should those two fights happen. And then the winner of that fight would then be the mandatory.
We don't know. We don't know when Garcia Campbell will happen, if it happens. What we can look at right now is that Fortuna has a date to fight Linares. From that fight, there will be one mandatory contender. We'll see when Haney is scheduled to do the fight, to do his fight, and then we will see what's going to be ordered next. Right now, we cannot anticipate.
You mentioned Devin Haney. Obviously, with myself and you, we've spoken about the lightweight situation for probably about 18 months, there or thereabouts. When Devin Haney was sidelined and made champion in recess, there was the interim title. Obviously, he'd actually won the interim title before then because Lomachenko had been elevated to franchise champion. But the interim title was then placed for Luke Campbell and Javier Fortuna. Now Devin Haney has returned, and now Devin Haney is now the full WBC champion. Why is there a need for an interim title?
Because there was a contract. Fortuna and Campbell were contracted to fight April 19 or April 17. They had a contract for a world title. So it is only fair to proceed with such designation for a fight not to hurt the boxers. So that's why the WBC Board of Governors has kept. There is no need because Haney is back. He's fit. He's medically fit to box. But we had to do justice to the fighter who had signed a contract for a fight for a WBC title.
But if I'm understanding what you've said correctly, whenever if Ryan Garcia boxes Luke Campbell for that interim title, there's no guarantees that the winner of that fight will then face Devin Haney, the full WBC champion.
I mean, they will. That fight is for a WBC championship, and then it depends on the timing. We don't know when that fight is not even set yet. So we're gonna address the timing of the fights once we know if they reach an agreement, when they will be fighting, etc.
I read an article a couple of days ago. I was speaking to some contacts and some friends of mine over at Golden Boy Promotions, obviously, who promote Ryan Garcia. And as I understand it, the deadline, not a deadline, but the date that they were initially set to come back to the WBC regarding that fight of Luke Campbell was yesterday. Have you got any update on that?
It was Friday, the date that we struck first, but it was a holiday, 4th of July. It's a holiday in the USA. Friday was a holiday. So we changed it to Monday. Tomorrow, we will be knowing if Ryan Garcia is engaging in this fight.
Have you had any indications from Golden Boy whether or not that would happen?
No information whatsoever.
With regards to Devin Haney, where does this leave him with an opponent? Obviously, we've kind of worked out the situations, or we've talked about at least the situations with the titles and the mandatory challenges. Does this mean that Devin Haney's next opponent has to come from the United States? Is this what you're saying? No,
it has to come from a place where they can make the fight. He can be from anywhere in the world. If they can enter the USA, or if Haney can travel to that country and do the fight, there's no restriction whatsoever. It is just a matter of practicality. As I mentioned, Fortuna and Linares were in California since January, so it was very easy for them to do that match. I know that there have been some fights that have not been able to be firmed due to travel restrictions. So this is a matter that has to be considered by all promoters.
Is Felix Verdejo a front runner for that fight? He's based in Las Vegas. He's number 15 with the WBC.
To fight Haney? Yeah, he could be. He's rated in the WBC. He's eligible, so that would not be an issue.
Looking at the WBC rankings at lightweight, one of the main reasons that we were going to do this interview anyway is it's about 12 months thereabouts since the franchise title was introduced by the WBC, the back end of June 2019 with Canelo Alvarez and Jamal Charlo. Looking at the WBC lightweight rankings, just at face value, you've got Vasyl Lomachenko as a franchise champion, Devin Haney as a fall champion, Linares and Fortuna are going to box for the Diamond title, Ryan Garcia potentially is going to box Luke Campbell for the interim title. That's 4 titles / designations, trophies, however you want to look at it, within one governing body. Is that good for the sport?
For me, it's sensational because I'm looking at 4 unbelievable fights in the immediate future. Lomachenko against Teofimo Lopez, the ultimate unification in the lightweight division, which is formidable. Everybody wants to see that fight. Haney, who is a potential superstar in the making, fighting, defending his title. Fortuna Linares is a sensational fight between 2 multi-division champions. And Ryan Garcia against Luke Campbell, it's a sensational fight. So I care for the millions watching great fights, great events, possibilities. And for those who have concerns or attack this concept, I understand and I appreciate, but I go the high route and I take the element of having great boxing matches, which is what everybody wants. The Diamond is not a title. It is a trophy that will be awarded to the winner. And the interim, I explained why we are honoring an interim. So if anyone wants to make a case, it's just to make a case. It's just to be out making a negative statement. I have given the perfect explanation of why we're proceeding with this. If we were doing this in every weight category or we were doing this constantly, it would be a different story. But I believe I have given a perfect explanation of every single fact and every single case, trying to be just to the fighters. And especially it's giving great activity and great boxing matches that are of the interest of the world.
I don't think it's necessarily a case of negativity. I think a lot of people are just trying to understand kind of how the process comes together and kind of the mechanisms behind that. One thing that's inarguable is they are fantastic fights, but I think what people are looking at is why the need and the necessity for so many belts within one governing body. We've spoken about this, about other governing bodies. I'll say the name because I know you won't. The WBA, I think the WBA regular titles, the interim titles, the gold titles, the super titles, not just myself, but other boxing fans, we look at that as a huge negative in the sport. And this is something that we've spoken about in the past. And yet there are now the same accusations being leveled at the WBC for too many belts and too many what people would consider to be meaningless trinkets.
As I said, I only talk about what we do. If others do that regularly and it's their common practice, that's not the WBC issue. I had given a perfect explanation of the lightweight division and the process. The way I see, this is a very large tournament put together for the entertainment of the fans around the world. And I hope all these fights take place and we can enjoy great fights.
Just continuing with the franchise situation, as I mentioned, it's been about a year thereabouts. How would you assess the franchise title and the success of the franchise title in the first year?
I believe it's a great designation, a great decision. Unfortunately, with the COVID-19, it has been derailed because Canelo could not fight in May as he had scheduled, and Lomachenko could not fight, I believe also was May 30, the great fight with Teofimo Lopez. So it was put aside for a little while because nobody's fighting. But the intentions of this is to provide great fights for the fans. And we were going to see, we eventually will see Lomachenko with Teofimo Lopez in a sensational showdown. And Canelo, we're waiting to see what is going to happen in September, apparently. But I feel very comfortable. There has been some questions, some concerns about this designation, about this new concept. I just, as I said before, let's give it a try, let's give it a chance. The idea is to provide a special position for those great champions who move the industry, who fight in different weight categories, who have a set of contracts that they have to fulfill, and they need the flexibility and lead of action. So I am taking again the high road. I am sorry if this confuses some of you, but I take the high road and I see the great fights happening as the plus.
Yeah, I think again it's important to point out, as we do when I grill you on certain situations, that you are always very well, you are always open to answering the questions. But with regards to the franchise title, I mean, you make the point about Lomachenko versus Lopez. Could that not have happened without the franchise title?
Yes, it could have happened. Of course, it could have happened. But this was a direct There was a direct line. Go back in the lightweight division for a couple of years. When Mikey Garcia relinquished the title, moving up in the weight, we ordered a series of fights to fill the title. And many of these fights did not come true. Teófimo Lopez was involved, and he received the opportunity to fight for the IBF. In the meantime, he was being very close with WBC. He always said he wanted to fight for the WBC. So he went that way. Haney fought Abdullayev. So Fortuna was scheduled in those fights. So it is a consequence of a series of orders which happened 2 years, what we're living right now. I feel very comfortable. I feel I've spoken to many persons who like the franchise situation, as long as it does not get corrupted. It does not get going as a form of making new champions and inventing new things. This is a very specific, very special, very unique for very, very few fighters. We were asked if Fury would be named franchise champion. And I have been clear that Fury will fight Wilder, and then he has to do the mandatory contender, the mandatory title defense. Whoever is the champion after Fury Wilder 3 has to do the mandatory title defense. So we're not going to use the franchise to step away from a mandatory that has been already set since time ago.
I think a lot of people will be pleased to hear that, first and foremost, because I guess the situation is that boxing, for right or wrong, has a structure with rankings, mandatory position, mandatory challenger, then faces the world champion. In that instance, in the heavyweight division, you're saying that the winner of Wilder Fury 3 will not be elevated to franchise champion and will have to face the mandatory. Why does that not have to be the same across the board? Why can that not be the same for the lightweights or the middleweights in Lomachenko and Canelo?
It's a very different scenario. Every single division, at any moment, is different. Lomachenko did not have a mandatory contender when he won the title. He was going to have a couple mandatory because he was a vacant title. Canelo, it was a different scenario. So we are trying to adjust in order to bring the better fights for the sport. So there is no doubt in anyone's mind that Lomachenko, Teófimo Lopez, is the best fight in the lightweight division. It's a dream fight, and it helped get through it.
On paper, at least, that fight, while Lomachenko is the franchise champion, Devin Haney is the full WBC champion. So in your opinion, is that an undisputed fight?
Absolutely, yes.
Can you see why that would confuse fans?
I mean, they will read what you say and they will see what you say. And the media is taking that route, being concerned about that fight being called undisputed, the ultimate undisputed. But I take as I've been saying, undisputed champions or fights for the undisputed championship are rare. And very much often, a fighter who wins all 4 belts very soon loses one of them for whatever reasons, or more of them. So I care for the fight. Lomachenko is a franchise champion. He's representing the WBC. And simply, if the fans and the media do not care to understand the WBC's rules or the WBC's decisions and go for the moral and for the perfect world, then there's nothing else I can say. I am very happy Lomachenko, Teofimo Lopez is happening. I am very happy for that, and it's a ultimate unification for the undisputed.
I guess where some of the frustration or some of the confusion, sorry, you're still there. I guess where some of the frustration or some of the confusion comes from, myself as a boxing fan, I don't know about you, and this is a question to you as well. I have grown somewhat wary or somewhat concerned, I guess you could say, over the rapid growth of UFC in combat sports. Now, the UFC model obviously completely different to boxing, different sports, etc. But the easily identifiable champions, one per weight class, except in extremely rare circumstances, that's something that we don't have in boxing, that boxing fans can't resonate with. People want to watch the sport to see one champion. Can you understand that viewpoint?
No, because the UFC is not like boxing. It's not boxing. The UFC is a company. They are they have a privilege from the laws, and they are not measured by the same stick as boxing is measured. They own. They are the sanctioning organization. They are the promoter. They are the manager. They are the media outlet. Everything in one. So they can do whatever they want, and there's no one to question it. So, I mean, it's you cannot compare UFC to boxing in any way, shape, or manner.
I appreciate that. And I did mention in the question, I understand the differences, but there are similarities within boxing and MMA. And I guess it goes back to people just wanting to see an established champion in each division.
Well, no, I'm sorry. But you have the UFC champion. But then what happens to Bellator? Then what happens to all the other companies? They're world champions, or they're whatever they're called. So it's exactly the same in boxing. WBC, WBO, IBF, WBA, IBC, IBA, WBF, WBU, all those that exist. We cannot control that. They exist. For us, the WBC is the greatest organization. The WBC is the world champion of the world. So is for the other organizations. They have their own champions. So it's just a case in the making constantly against the sport. Because we don't want to see it. I don't know how many mixed martial arts organizations exist, but that's a perfect explanation I have just given you. The UFC is the UFC. Bellator is Bellator. Each has their champion, and nobody, they don't even allow unifications. So that is worse than boxing.
As I say, it was a general outline of a comparison, but nicely done. Just before I finish on all things franchise champion, I think it's important to bring this up because you mentioned that the media and the fans have, in your opinion, a negative perception of the franchise title. Now, I put out a poll.
Not everyone, Rob. No, I have spoken to many who have the understanding and who like it very much, and who see. We have to be visionaries. We have to look ahead. You have to look at the forest, not a tree that is blocking your sight. There's a lot of people who like it. and a lot of people willing to give it a try. A lot of people saying, let's try something and see where it leads. So it is not a general feeling because social media, when you read one comment, then you think it's the whole world. It's not like that. I have a lot of members of the boxing community, a lot of members of the media that might not even understand it or like it, but let's give it a try. Let's see where it leads.
I appreciate that. I didn't mean that as a sweeping statement. You've cleared that up well, thank you. But going back to what I was saying, I put up a poll today on my personal Twitter, and it was something that was just kind of offhand. And I asked my followers, are you in favour of the franchise title? And the explanation I gave was the purpose of the franchise title is so champions can pursue the biggest fights in boxing without being held up by mandatories. Franchise champions represent the WBC. The title cannot be lost in the ring. Are you in favour of the franchise title? Now, we received over 1,000 votes. 93% said no, they're not in favour of the franchise title. What's your thought?
Well, that's their opinion, and I respect it, and we will see where this goes.
Does that tell you as
when the WBC changed from 15 to 12 rounds, and had it been social media at that time, I could assure you 93% would have said no. And today we have 12 rounds. Many lives have been saved. The dignity of the fighter after the ring has been saved. Of course, this is a medical decision, but the popularity was very, very against making such a decision.
So, admittedly, my sample is just over 1,000 votes, so it doesn't represent the majority of boxing, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it is an independent poll. But so what you're saying is the fact that 93% of these 1,000 plus people saying no, they're not in favour of the franchise title, that doesn't concern you?
No. No. I respect it, and it's an idea, but it doesn't concern me because we see the whole picture, because we're trying to do something good, and at this time might be bad for 930 persons in the UK. We will see a year from now, 2 years from now. Of course, I might be wrong, and this will lead to nothing, but I might be right. It doesn't hurt anyone. I mean, what we're trying to do is give the opportunity for great fights, and we want to acknowledge the great champions of an era. It's an acknowledgement. It's a privilege. They have earned it inside the ring to have the possibility of going out and making the best fights and not being abused by a system that most of the times works very well, the mandatory title defense. For your knowledge, the WBC was the one who invented and created the mandatory concept. So this is something that we have studied, and we will give it a try, and we will go and it has a great benefits, great purposes, and as a side note, it has nothing to do with financials, because any money generated from franchise fights, 100% is dedicated for medical research, for clean boxing program, and from the weight management program. So it's not about money, it's not about anything else other than giving the fans the fights that they deserve to see, that they want to see.
Final question on franchise titles, Mauricio. I do appreciate your time as always. The cynics point out, and there, I will send you the poll afterwards. You can have a look at some of the comments that are underneath. But I think the main issue is that you mentioned about the WBC introducing the mandatory title. But the main issue that people have is that it appears on the surface, at least, that Canelo, Lomachenko, these high superstar profile fighters now have kind of a free pass to circumvent their mandatory obligations.
Look, Rob, they have paid their dues. They have fought the best of the best for years. And I don't see Canelo, I don't see Lomachenko taking the easy road for the rest of their career. All they want is the best fights out there. So if a mandatory who is not deserved of that level, it has happened. I mean, the system of reaching a mandatory challenger has often given us a mandatory contender who is not at the level of a champion. And we can create many of examples. We cannot risk that with a legendary champion like Canelo, like a legendary champion like Lomachenko. So we cannot risk, should not put at risk a champion's legacy because of a mandatory contender when that concept is abused. It has happened. The mandatory situation works. It's the most just system, but it has been abused at times, and fighters have had to lose their titles, unfortunately, due to not fulfilling mandatory. Not because they don't want to fight, but because it's not the fight that at that level they should be fighting. I don't know if my English was able to put that message forward.
I think you did pretty good. Before I let you go, Mauricio, I was on Sky Sports today having a look, as I usually do. I saw comments attributed to yourself regarding Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury. Do you have any developments? Do you have any movement on whether or not that fight is going to happen this year?
No, not yet. We're expecting to have official news shortly. Of course, we understand the complications. It's a major fight. It's a major event which needs all the considerations from all sides regarding where, when, how, and we're just waiting to hear from them, hopefully in the near future.
Now, the date that's kind of emerged has been December the 19th in Las Vegas. With Dillian Whyte's mandatory status in February, due in February of next year, would a December 19th date for Wilder Fury 3 be a quick enough turnaround? Would you be happy with that to enforce the mandatory by February 2020?
Well, we have been consistent in what we say. We're going to be very flexible in every single situation because we cannot control the pandemic and the limitations that we are all experiencing. The WBC position is to sanction Fury Wilder, and the winner makes a mandatory. So we have that set in stone. Anything else is variable, is flexible.
And that flexibility, is that something that's been agreed between yourself, Eddie Hearn, and Dillian Whyte? When I spoke to Eddie Hearn, he was pretty adamant that it must be by February 2021.
Cannot comment, my friend. I know I answer everything. Unfortunately, we are in a process that I cannot comment.
Okay. Well, I think everybody who's watched this interview can see that you'll answer the questions if you're asked. Final one. I actually went back to Eddie Hearn and said that that you would like to debate him on whether or not there needed to be a one overseeing governing body, as per our last interview. He said he'd be interested in doing that with you, Mauricio. If you would like to pick a date that suits yourself and Mr. Hearn, and I'm happy to play the mediator in this role, and you can discuss the pros and cons of boxing's current setup and the changes, if any, that you feel could be made to improve the sport.
Absolutely, I'm happy to do it. I like Eddie. I respect him. He has been an unbelievable force in the sport. He has been very successful. I will not engage in any negativity. That's what I can tell you right now. If it's not correct for a promoter and the president of the WBC to go back and forth in something negative, but I will be willing. I will respect his comments, but I will stand for what I have to say. But we'll try not to. As long as you're the referee and you're like Joe Cortez, fair and firm, we can do it.
Yeah, I think I'll do my best Joe Cortez impression. Might have to shave my head, but I'll be there. I think that's a good point that you've made there, by the way. I know it's somewhat in jest, but the fact that what I think boxing lacks is the ability for, not, this isn't aimed at yourself or Rezi or anybody, this is more a general comment of those in power in boxing, is that there's too many cooks and too many egos that get in the way that prevent what you've just said, which is an honest conversation, a reasonable conversation that doesn't have to descend into negativity. So I promise I will be my best Joe Cortez impersonation, and I will get it happening. Mauricio, always a pleasure. Thanks very much for speaking to me at Boxing Social, and as always for taking my questions. We'll do it a yearly thing. Every year we'll do a yearly catch up on the franchise situation.
I like it. We'll see a year from now how it evolved, and I can tell you that 93% is gonna go lower.
We'll see. Thanks very much, Mauricio.
Have a great Sunday. Thank you, my friend.